Hello one and all, Jasper here, and you read the title. You probably saw the first video to this little series as well, so I won't be going over my usual warnings, and instead just jump right in. Especially since this episode changes so very little from the books. It is fantastic, even if it still has some flaws due to the previous episode. But enough about that, let's just get started. We're going to be skipping many wonderful scenes at the start of this episode. If you want to hear me and my friends' thoughts about them, make sure to check out our podcast where we dive into a bit more detail. But jumping into the episode, the first scene we're going to want to cover is the small council scene, where Larius reveals that blood was apprehended. The show implies it was the same night as the murder, but in actuality, in the books, it was a few days after. Yep, in this episode, this is how nitpicky we are going to get. After this, we have the funeral progression, a wonderful scene and show only. While it is not impossible that such an act was taken by the Greens, it is not mentioned in the books, and it is of a grand enough scale that I do believe it would have been mentioned by the historians. The funeral progression jumps back and forth with the questioning of blood. In the books, it stated that blood was tortured for weeks until he was finally allowed to die, while Aegon seems to beat him to death with a mace in the show the first chance he gets. Aegon is also not mentioned to have taken part in the torturing in the books himself at all, but his addition to enacting his revenge in such a matter is great, though a part of me wishes we got to see more, kind of like how Ramsay treated Theon in the original series. But overall, fantastic. Now let's fly over to Dragonstone, again skipping some very great interactions and scenes, and starting with Baela and Rhaenyra. You see, Rhaenyra asked Baela to patrol King's Landing and keep a watch for any movement, I'm assuming military-based. Baela, in the books at this point in the war, is kept at Dragonstone due to her dragon being too young to fight, so Rhaenyra asking her to keep watch over King's Landing is a very dangerous choice to make, since pretty much anyone from the Greens would be able to best her in dragon combat. The next scene we can comment on is Daemon flying off to the Riverlands. I mentioned it in the previous episode, I believe, but just in case, because I'm too lazy to double check, Daemon was already in the Riverlands before Blood and Cheese ever took place, so the timing of actions as far as the war effort goes has been moved around a tad. Flying back over to King's Landing, we see Criston Cole taking steps in his own way to end the war, ordering a fellow member of the Kingsguard, Eric, to Dragonstone in an attempt to assassinate Rhaenyra by pretending to be his own twin brother. This does happen in the books, but it should be noted not till quite a bit later. Criston would be named as Hand of the King before he would send Eric off on this little quest, and many battles, specifically in the Riverlands, would have already taken place, and we have yet to hear of anything. Sticking around here in King's Landing, we also get a scene with Hugh the blacksmith, where we see why he was asking for the gold in the previous episode. He has a sick child, and he and his wife are worried. In the books, there is no mention of any sort of family. No wife, kids, nothing. Now, over to Driftmark. Fucking hell, we are bouncing all over the place. Yeah. We see Alan again with his brother Adam, and say it with me, originally this character wasn't black. He had white hair, pale skin, and purple eyes. Done? Great. Now let's move on. We have Rhaenyra and Mysaria interacting with one another. It should be noted that at this point in the story, Mysaria serves under Daemon rather than Rhaenyra directly as a mistress of whispers, and it isn't until later in the books that we see these two interact, because remember, in the books, Mysaria is very much treated as an ally and never an enemy of the Blacks. Back in King's Landing, Aegon has been trying his best to get justice for his son, though might have overreacted just a little bit, as he has decided to hang all of the rat catchers that serve in the Red Keep. In the books, we do not know if Cheese was among the dead or he got away, but in the show, they make sure to confirm to us that yes, Cheese is indeed a part of the dead. Otto's anger at Aegon over this is reasonable, since he also voiced his anger at Aemond when he killed Luke at the start of everything, at least in the books, but it's not mentioned in the books that he reprimanded Aegon for such actions, only that Otto ordered 300 cats to replace the rat catchers that were killed. It's why there are so many cats for Arya to catch when she's in King's Landing 150 odd years later. He is also not stripped of his office at this particular moment. He tries to orchestrate a few plans on his own. I don't want to get into too much detail, but these plans are slow burning, and Aegon removes him from his position, thinking he is not acting enough, and then gives it to Criston. And finally, we have Sir Eric sneaking into the castle of Dragonstone. We see the guy walking with a group of peasants not far from the shore, decked out in his Kingsguard armor. In the books, he did have a bit of a fisherman's disguise when arriving on the shores of Dragonstone, and only later discarded it. Arriving on the shores in full plate would have made this plan even more ridiculous than it already is. Mysaria is being escorted to the docks and sees him, and seems to be conflicted or confused at what just happened. In the books, she played no part in these events, and was most definitely not on her way off the island. She was in good standing with both Rhaenyra and Daemon. The events of this assassination are a bit different as well. While it isn't for sure known if Eric was sent to kill Rhaenyra or her sons, we do have a decent idea on the events that take place. On his way to the royal chambers, he just so happened to run into his brother, the only person who would know who he is and why he is there. The songs that are sung of this event are stated to say that Eric drew his blade, saying, "I love you, brother," and Eric responded in kind, "And I you, brother," as he drew his own. Grand Maester Munkin writes that the two of them fought for over an hour, which, holy shit, that is a long-ass fight, with everyone following the noise and watching as they did battle, not knowing who to aid. In the end, they dealt each other mortal wounds and died in one another's arms. Which is kind of ridiculous. I feel as though they probably should have been subdued, both of them, while fighting for an hour, and some simple questioning would be enough to figure out which twin is which. Yes, they are identical physically, but surely Eric wouldn't be familiar with the castle and would stumble when questioned about it. Mushroom's tale is a bit more realistic. The fight itself was only a few moments, with no declarations of love, each brother calling the other a traitor. Eric technically won the duel, but was so injured that he didn't die for another 4 days, cursing his brother with every breath he took. In the show, Eric is successful in getting to the queen, though when his brother bursts through the doors finding out of what has happened, it gets a little messy here. First off, once Eric arrives, why doesn't Eric just go over to Rhaenyra and kill her? Secondly, how did Eric figure it out? Presumably, Mysaria would have told him, but we don't see this, and if she did, wouldn't it have been a good idea to take other guards with them on the way to the chambers to help subdue his brother? Thirdly, why is only a single member of the Kingsguard brought in after the fight? Get more people, especially when the Kingsguard who shows up later isn't even in his fucking armor. I know others show up, but right after the fight when there's nothing to be done. And this feels a little too much convenient for the story. Then again, the book has its own issues. Overall, though, I enjoyed the scene, though I find the start to be rather unforgivable. Before we finish out, there is one scene I want to go on that's technically not different from the books at all, but it's the scene where Otto and Alicent finally mention Daemon Targaryen. Thank God it's about fucking time. Why they decided to go for so long without any hints or mentions of him is ridiculous, and I'm very conflicted. He should have been mentioned in the first season. On one hand, it's great that Daemon made it into the show, as he provides a bit more power to the Greens that I feel like they desperately need given the situation of the show. But on the other, so far, it's kind of horse piss how he's been handled. But beggars can't be choosers. I should just be happy that he is in the show. And who knows, maybe because of this, Nettle will make an appearance. And there we go. That is how the episode ends. I think that was probably the best way to do it. I mean, could you imagine if the episode instead ended on Alicent coming across her son, crying at the loss of his child and everything that's been going on, and instead of comforting her or showing any sort of motherly care, she goes and fucks Kristen Cole. Thank God that didn't happen. Thank God the showrunners are not that incompetent. Thank God we ended on an actual proper scene instead of that. Right? Right? Fucking dipshits. Either way, overall, a good episode. If you want my more detailed thoughts, once again, check out the podcast I do with DJ Fella. Until then, stay safe, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.